compared to, a skyscraper compared to like a daffodil. So pastoral poetry was simply more popular because that's what they interacted with. Personification is when we treat something non-human as if it were human, which we've covered. A quatrain is a 4-line stanza, usually with alternate rhymes. Refrain is a set of words repeated at the end of each stanza, and again, that was used more commonly in the past when poetry was more of an oral form. A rhythm is interchangeable with meter. That's where we go through and we identify the linguistic sound pattern. A rhyme is an identity in sound. So this identifies something called a hard rhyme. And that's exact identity in sound. You also have something called a slant rhyme. And you see these used a lot in Shakespearean sonnets or in any form that requires a specific rhyme format. A slant rhyme is simply some identity in sound. And it's almost like you have a creation of assonance, alliteration, or consonants. It doesn't have to be in the middle. Stand and still happen to end or begin with the same sound. It could be like hard rhyme interlined. So what did I have in here? That's internal rhyme. I fell off the bed and busted my head. So those are the 3 types of rhyme. That's not a comprehensive list. It's simply the 3 most common types. So those are the types that we'll include in our introduction to poetry. We have a simile, which is the same in poetry as it was in fiction. We have a sonnet. There's 2 types of sonnets we talked about, the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan. This is called Italian. This is English. And a sonnet is typically 14 lines, and it's broken up into 4 stanzas. So you typically have, which we'll go back over that. Typically have 14 lines, and the letters represent a rhyme pattern. So you typically have 3 quatrains, which are 4, and then a heroic couplet at the end, and every other line rhymes within the 3 quatrains, whereas the heroic couplet rhymes with itself, giving it more emphasis than the rest of the stanzas. A stanza we covered. A symbol is the same in poetry as it was in fiction. It's something physical that stands for or represents something larger or more abstract. We had what prominent symbol in the garden party? Laura's what? Cat. And then in Bliss we had her looking outside at the what? The pear tree, right? And the odor of chrysanthemums, it states itself, etc., etc. Same thing in poetry. Triplet is a 3-line stanza. And that's it. On the next page, we have something called the elements of poetry. And when you go through and you do a close reading of a poem, it's called an explication. Whereas in a close reading of fiction, you can choose the most prominent symbols and focus on those in your analysis. In an explication or a close reading of a poem, you're supposed to identify every single category that contributes to the theme you choose. Some poetry can be cryptic, whereas you read it and you're like, I have no freaking idea what that's about. It sounds like Chinese. Some poetry has very clear themes, We're going to look at both, and you may find yourself more inclined to prefer one over the other. People that like to think abstractly tend to prefer the more cryptic poetry, and people that like black and white and like very clear meanings tend to hate abstract poetry and prefer the concrete meaning ones. Either way, we kind of look at both, and you'll see which one you like better. But these are the categories of an explication. First, you examine how the poem makes you feel. Are you warm and fuzzy? Do you feel angry? Do you feel sad? Do you feel pity, sympathy, etc.? Of course, you can have more than one emotion. The theme. Sometimes it's the first thing that you can identify. I like to liken that category to like a puzzle. Like if you have a puzzle and you have a picture on the front of the puzzle, you know what you're putting together. Some poems are like boxes of puzzle pieces with no picture, and you have to put pieces together before you can get any idea of what the overall meaning of or picture that the puzzle is working towards. And again, you'll see a preference on yourself as to what you like. Title, look at how the title's significant. Sometimes the title has no significance, sometimes it has great significance, just like in fiction. The type of poem. How does the form contribute to the meaning of the poem? Typically sonnets are about what? Love. If you have a sonnet about hate, that would be ironic, that would be significant. Poetic speaker, who is the speaker? Why do we trust him or her? Tone, what is the speaker's attitude towards the subject? You can have varying tones, you can have multiple tones, you can have shifting tones, just like in fiction. The form, how does the form relate to the content? Punctuation, what type of punctuation is in the poem? Is there enjambment? Does the enjambment create ambiguity or any specific meaning, etc.? Diction, is the language colloquial, formal, simple, or unusual, and for what reason? Word choice, connotation versus denotation, that again can create ambiguity. Allusions, references to something outside the poem. Figurative language would be metaphors, similes, analogies, personification, hyperboles, etc. Rhyme and meter, what is the significance of the rhyme if it's used? Language, alliteration, assonance, and consonants, and what is the effect of that? Repetition, any words, phrases, sentences, ideas repeated, if so, what is the significance? Tensions, good and bad, war and peace, happy, sad, hate versus love, past versus present, etc. And images. And sometimes by the time you get to images, you're tapped out because you've already discussed every word in the poem. Okay. On the next page, we have an actual poem, and it is entitled A Martian Sends a Postcard Home. And already, what can we tell is unusual about the poem? It's a Martian sending a postcard home. Okay. What are some of the things about our society that we accept as normal that are completely humanly and culturally and socially contrived? Gender roles would be one thing. A lot of gender roles, which we'll cover in our gender role unit, are contrived. What about technology? Was technology a basic biological need of human beings? So, like in caveman days, did they have technology? Did they live without it? Okay, if you had to use the restroom 400 years ago, where did you go? In the woods. You know, you would squat out in the woods. Living situation. Typically, way back in the past, do we have single family homes? No, how do people live? Communally. Like, you know, you lived in your teepee with like 20 people. Like, you know, basic human biology did not factor in a lot of this. If you wanted light, did you turn on a switch? What did you do? You went outside, or you waited and you know, until it was light outside, or you made a fire. So for someone to arrive in our society that was alive 500 years ago, what are some of the things that they would be like weirded out by? Outside, what do we drive? How do we get to school? Cars. Would the car seem unusual to the person? Yeah. What else? The way that we dress would seem unusual because we have fashion. Is fashion a biological sort of urge? No. So the fact that you wear what on your face to help you see? Glasses, right? You know, stories were told. So what would it seem weird that stories were presented in? A book. And do you think human beings are overall happy or sort of desperate, sad creatures? Right. Okay, so however, like, we're so embedded in our culture and our gender roles and our society that we don't see those things as being unusual because that's all we see and that's all we've grown up with. So to have a human being portray our weirdness as being weird would be kind of like hypocritical because we're human beings. So to portray us from the view of somebody completely foreign to our culture and our world and our nature and our technology kind of puts a perspective on things that we wouldn't be able to gain from a human perspective. So that's kind of some foreground for reading the poem. So I'm going to read the poem to you. And after I read it, there are some things that I would like you to look for. A. How many people think human beings are very, very reliant on technology? Yes. So, this poem was written in 1979, and that's one of his main themes, 39 years ago, is how overly dependent human beings are on technology. So think about this same Martian visiting now and how completely appalled he would be by our society. So look for theme, look for repetitions, figures of speech, riddles, which you'll get what I mean by that when I read it to you, and assonance, alliteration, and consonants. These ones are nice because they have nothing to do with actually understanding the poem. They're almost like mathematical. You can go through and look for sound play. And if I read the poem and you're like, oh, what the heck was that about? This is a good place to start because it has nothing to do with actually analyzing the poem. Okay, so by looking at the poem, we can see the entire poem is written in what? 2-line stanzas, which are called couplets. And by looking at the poem, we see that some of the lines have no punctuation at the end. So that means that a lot of the poem is what? Indefinite. Okay. Cactuses are mechanical birds with many wings, and some are treasured for their marks. They cause the eyes to melt or the body to shriek without pain. I have never seen one fly, but sometimes they perch on the hand. Mist is when the sky is tired of light and rests its soft machine on the ground. Then the world is dim and bookish, like engravings under tissue paper. Rain is when the earth is television. It has the properties of making colors darker. Model T is a room with a lock inside. A key is turned to free the world from movement, so quick there is a film to watch for anything missed. But time is tied to the wrist or kept in a box, ticking with impatience. In homes, a haunted apparatus sleeps that snores when you pick it up. If the ghost cries, they carry it to their lips and soothe it to sleep with sounds. And yet they wake it up deliberately by tickling with a finger. Only the young are allowed to suffer openly. Adults go to a punishment room with water but nothing to eat. They lock the door and suffer the noises alone. No one is exempt and everyone's pain has a different smell. At night, when all the colors die, they hide in pairs and read about themselves in color with their eyelids shut. So we'll take a few minutes and go through these categories. Again, start here if these ones seem a little bit overwhelming, and think outside of the box. A lot of poetry implores you to do that, to think about things not in a literal perspective but abstractly. Okay?